and it's great to welcome you again. You were last speaking at the Tri-State event, so now it's great to see you in an international format with us here. We've got colleagues from around the world, so very interested to see what you want to tell us.
Right. So, when we talk about shifting risk paradigms when it comes to secure transportation, I think, the elephant in the room, of course, as it has been for the last year or so, is COVID-19 and what that does to the secure transportation risk paradigm. And of course, the reality is it's changed the way we approach moving our executives. It's changed the way our executives perceive the risk of being in the vehicle. And it's led to some technological advances that are pretty interesting that we've been tracking pretty closely. When this all started, there was a big push. How do we disinfect, clean, sanitize vehicles? How do we reduce the exposure of our principals in and around those vehicles? And there was a very traditional approach, right? Cleaning, disinfecting, sanitizing. What do those things mean? How do we accomplish them using traditional tools? Which, we at VDI played a significant role in that a lot of our clients were looking to us and we were researching and providing them with possible solutions. Again, from how do we approach the disinfecting and cleaning and sanitizing process, when we should do it, what materials we should use, knowing that materials were limited, there was limited available materials to do that with. And we were able to provide some guidance. And from there, as is often the case, when you've got more people looking at the problem, there were more solutions being presented. And some of our clients were looking at things like using ozone generators to, over a longer period of time, several hours, fill the passenger compartment with ozone and kill any living organism in it. Then there were those who were looking at different foggers, put a fogger in the car, allow it to fog the interior of the car with disinfectant. Very effective, but a potential risk emerged of flash fires. So that sort of fell by the wayside. And while all that is going on, and how do we disinfect it, they were looking at different ways to shield, if you will, the exposure of the principal and the driver to one another. So some polycarbonate shields were on the market, some which fit very well, some didn't fit very well at all. Those that fit really well created some climate control issues in the cars that weren't equipped with dual systems front and rear. So there were all sorts of things going on as this risk began to mature and our approach to managing it began to mature. Then the auto manufacturers started getting involved. Ford developed a software update for some of their vehicles that would allow the heating system to run at a higher temperature, 135 to 137 degrees, again, meant to kill the living viral organisms in the vehicle environment. So that was another approach when the manufacturers got involved. And then Honda and Acura started looking at improving the filtration quality of the cabin filters and created some sleeves that will fit on your standard cabin air filter to further filter out down to the 1 micron level to potentially filter out from the exterior the presence of any COVID viral matter. So those approaches work very well on a limited basis. Ford with obviously the Ford family of vehicles, and Honda and Acura obviously with their family of vehicles. So some great progress was being made. And most recently, necessity kind of being the mother of invention, we've seen a new approach that seems to be probably the most effective when it comes to disinfecting, which is the use of electrostatic spray guns. Some of you who have been traveling on aircraft may have seen these when you see the crews that are cleaning aircraft or even cleaning some office or public spaces. They're wearing these backpacks and they have this battery pack and this gun, if you will, that they're spraying things down with. Well, the industry that has created that technology has miniaturized it, made it more portable and more affordable to the point that a typical electrostatic spray gun system that you might use in a vehicle is in the $600 to $800 range. They come with obviously a smaller water reservoir. One of the more interesting ones, you're actually putting water in the reservoir and dissolving a tablet in it that has the disinfectant. And the advantage that these systems provide, because the liquid as it exits the application gun is electrostatically charged, it sticks to surfaces, undersides of surfaces. So if you spray under the dashboard, it's not going to be dripping all over. It's actually going to adhere to the surfaces. If, as you're spraying it, you're running the vehicle's duct system and heating or air conditioning duct system on recirculate, it will actually draw it in and coat the surfaces of the ductwork with the disinfectant solution. So much more effective in coverage, and of course, much cleaner and easier to use even than the fogger, right? Even than just sitting in there spraying. Doesn't necessarily negate the need to occasionally do a deep cleaning of the vehicle, which would include vacuuming, using warm soapy water, letting the surfaces that you can use that water on sit for 10, 15 minutes, keep them wet the whole time. That's still a requirement. But when we're talking about disinfecting on a daily or even maybe multiple times a day based on who's in the vehicle or whether we're moving multiple principals in the same vehicle, or even the risk, the exposure risk, those electrostatic guns, very effective system. You can do it in 5 to 10 minutes on some vehicles, 10 to 15 on others, and you need to wait just another 10 minutes for the disinfectant to clear the atmosphere, and you're ready to move the principal. So that, from that respect, when we talk about the shifting risk paradigms, and of course the technology that provides us effective solutions, it's been very impressive. I mean, we're talking, let's call it 10 to 11 months. The way we approach managing the COVID or really any exposure, bioorganic exposure, has progressed tremendously. And that's something that security drivers, secure transportation managers, EP practitioners, EP managers need to be aware of, because we are getting those questions. We're getting those questions from our clients, which include multinational corporations, high net worth families, even government and law enforcement agencies. But those questions are being driven by their principals who are saying, hey, how are we addressing this? I don't think there's anybody on the planet who doesn't understand that we're in the middle of a highly contagious pandemic and that we need to have these risk management solutions. So kudos to our clients for bringing them to us. Kudos to our clients for keeping us informed on what the solutions they're finding are, so that we can continue to promulgate those and pass them on to folks like those who are here at the conference. But that's not the only risk we're facing. And I think, as EP practitioners, as risk managers, we need to always be forward looking. Yes, we've got that immediate risk that we're addressing, but what are the risks that are coming forward? What are we going to face tomorrow, right? What are we facing today that's going to be an increased risk tomorrow? I think when we talk about that, we need to look at technology, vehicle technology. Today's cars are not your father's vehicle. That's a given. I know a couple of the presenters have spoken on it. So we're going to overlap and drill down into some of those points. I think is the best approach to this, because it is an emerging risk, and because the technology is evolving as quickly as it is in automobiles, the risks are evolving just as quickly. And there's some good news and there's some bad news with that. First, let's look at the cars, right? So, the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers has this spectrum report, right? And it's more of a online report now. But in 2009, right, 2009, think about that. We're talking about, 12 years ago. They talked about this. The title of one of the reports was "This Car Runs on Code." At that time, vehicles on average had 100 microprocessors and 50 electronic control units, ECUs. They needed 100 million plus lines of code to operate those systems and to make sure those systems interacted properly. And there's 5 miles of wiring. 12 years later, those vulnerabilities, right, those risk vectors, if you will, have increased exponentially. In fact, an anonymous automotive engineer recently that we were talking to said, hey, the only reason we're putting wheels on a vehicle is to keep the computers from scraping the ground. So really, we're talking about computer platforms on wheels. And as we know, cyber is a huge emerging risk. It's certainly matured in some respects. And now, of course, we've got to be concerned about what are the cyber risks to our vehicles. We're really at an intersection between automotive technology and cybersecurity. The good news about that is that we know the highest risk vectors. RF technology and telematics are two of the highest risk vectors when it comes to cyber and automotive technology. Of course, RF technology is Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. These are open communication platforms. And the same vulnerabilities that exist on, our smartphones exist in our vehicle. And perhaps even more so. We'll talk about that in a second. So these open communication platforms, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, create huge risk vectors. And then there's telematics, right? Telematics, and one of the speakers mentioned it, right? Just because we have this technology available, we need to really be introspective and ask ourselves, do we really need to use it? So telematics, which combines GPS and onboard data acquisition with programs that allow us to transmit that information to a data collection point, whether it's for tracking purposes or just maintaining visibility of vehicle condition and whatnot. Those telematic systems pose a huge risk. And you're at the mercy of, in some cases, the security of those who are managing those systems for you. Yeah, it would be great to know where that vehicle is every minute of every day. And it would be great to know what condition that vehicle in, or get an alert if the vehicle has a problem, so that frees up the security driver and perhaps the protection practitioner in the right front seat to deal with the safety and security risks that they're immersed in. And it's great to know that. But on the other side of the coin, we're introducing another potential fault point into the system, which is third-party providers' computer networks, our own computer and internet communication networks, and of course, the technology in the vehicle, right? Because it's got to commute external to the vehicle. So those are things we need to consider. What are the risks? Are they worth taking the risks? And as someone earlier mentioned, our principals tend to be very intelligent, if not brilliant. They tend to be very tech savvy. We need to be able to at least speak intelligently to them if they're going to be making those decisions. Right? And some of the things we need to be concerned about with those threat vectors, particularly when it comes to Bluetooth, which most key fobs now are using Bluetooth Low Energy Technology, BLE, and gentleman Leonard Wouters at the University of Leuven in Belgium has successfully 3 times in 3 years exploited that technology on a particular manufacturer's vehicles. But know that that technology exists and is used by the vast majority of manufacturers. And what he's been able to do most recently, November of 2020, from 5 meters within 90 seconds, using very easily accessible open source technology, was able to take full control of a $100,000 vehicle's control systems and security systems through the key fob. unlock the car, deactivate the alarms, lock the car. This is not something that you need a PhD student at a university in order to pull off. This is something that I would imagine, at least here in the U.S., probably 50% of high school kids understand the technology that's available and could pull this sort of exploitation off. When we're talking about these high-risk vectors, we're also talking about low effort to exploit those risks and a exploitation capability that exists beyond the context of our normal threats, right? And as social, economic, and political upheaval continue and our potential threat sources expand, we've got to be sensitive to the fact that they have access to some technology that increases the risk to the principal when the vehicle is at a standstill, and even when it's moving. There's any number of hacks that have been successful through any number of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth vectors, including things like the tire pressure monitoring systems on vehicles, which operate through Bluetooth, that have been, in a controlled setting, have been exploited to take control of any number of those multitude of electronic control units that more and more are interconnected through a CAN bus in the vehicle. 10 years ago, hacking into the infotainment system on a vehicle required direct access to it, introducing either through a CD, remember those, or nowadays a thumb drive, right, a USB drive, introducing some malicious code into the system. And you were limited to what you could connect to through that system. 5 years ago, two researchers with a laptop hacked into the infotainment system on a U.S. manufacturer's vehicle from 2 miles away and took control of the steering and braking functions of the cars, which are now what we would call drive-by-wire systems, right? They're no longer mechanical linkages. They're electronically controlled. So as technology has become more integrated in the vehicles, it has created a greater and greater risk to the occupants of the vehicle and those who are trying to protect them. Now, fortunately, the risk mitigation and management tools for these threats are virtually the same as they would be for your desktop computer, your smartphone, your laptop or tablet. It's firewalls, it's antivirus programs, it's endpoint detection and response. Those are the risk mitigation management and management tools and strategies. We know that. But the challenge remains in the automotive world, right? That was the good news is we know where the highest risk vectors are. We know what the exploitation methodologies might look like. The bad news is auto manufacturers admittedly are behind the curve on this. The Ponemon Institute conducted a study in 2019 that demonstrated that 62% of all auto manufacturers surveyed, and they were not only vehicle manufacturers, but the suppliers as well, believe that vehicle software and, importantly enough, the related components are at risk of malicious attacks. They know that risk. But that same survey found that 89% of vehicle manufacturers and suppliers are not confident that they are keeping up with that threat of malicious attacks. They know they're behind the curve. And perhaps most surprisingly, for those of us on the secure transportation side of the EP equation, 30% of those manufacturers that responded to that survey admitted that they have yet to establish a dedicated cybersecurity program for their components or their vehicle. So that's very concerning. 62% of them say, oh yeah, we believe the products we build are at risk of malicious attack. 89% of them say, yeah, we're probably not keeping up with that threat of malicious attack. And yet 30% of them, almost a third, of those surveyed, and it was 900 and something vehicle manufacturers and their suppliers, have yet to establish a dedicated cybersecurity program. And the reason that related components, if you recall when I spoke about the 62% of auto manufacturers, believe that vehicle software and those related components are at risk of malicious attack. The reason that those related components are such a concern is that they're on almost every vehicle, right? We don't have to have a vehicle, we don't have a Mercedes Maybach with level 3 autonomous technology, which is not self-driving, but it is very close to it. In fact, a vehicle today that has basic collision avoidance technology, such as emergency assist braking or even lane keeping assist technology, has these components on it, and these components have some specific vulnerabilities that have been easily identified. We talked about it at the regional forum, and some of those vulnerabilities include being able to trigger a LiDAR sensor, right, which is a more and more common technology array used in things like adaptive cruise control and collision avoidance, emergency assist braking, even pedestrian detection systems. You can trigger those systems to then put its companion electronic control units into what's called safe mode, which basically then the vehicle is brought to a halt using a laser pen or pointer that you can buy on Amazon for $29.95. A researcher in the UK did that. And when he engaged the arrays, those LiDAR arrays, we're talking, they're coming down in price. 5 years ago, they were $15,000 an array. Now they're somewhere between $7,500 and $8,000 array. Very technical systems, integrating both laser and imaging technologies, very sophisticated. And yet with a $30 laser pointer or pen, they can be spoofed into bringing the vehicle into safe mode simply because they don't recognize the signature of the laser that's being shined at. And even simpler, you go to the high definition or super high definition cameras that are part of some of these systems, so that the vehicles are taking in the imagery around them of the roads, of the markings on the roads, of the signs, and processing all that information. But something as simple as a high intensity LED light, like you'll see sometimes here in the States on 4-wheel drive or off-road vehicles. You'll see them in the Middle East on some of the desert vehicles as well. Well, those high intensity LED arrays can be just as easily spoofed as that high-tech system like LiDAR. And again, researcher in the UK takes a common over-the-counter, off-the-shelf, however you want to term it, LED light array, puts a standard flasher unit on it, powers it up, and the light is so intense that it literally disables or permanently disables the closed capacitance discharge chips, the imaging chips on those cameras, in about half of the cameras that they tried this on. 100% of those cameras, because of the intensity of the light and the inability to understand what it is, right? It's outside the operating parameters of that component, trips the ECU through the CAN bus into putting the vehicle into safe mode, effectively bringing it to a stop with about $100 worth of hardware, probably less today, right? So it's not just about emerging risks in autonomous vehicle technology. One is that technology is already here to a certain extent in those LiDAR and high-def camera systems that are relied on by level 2, level 3 systems, right? Your collision avoidance, your advanced driver assistance system. But the emerging risks more so become the V2V, vehicle-to-vehicle technology, and the V2I, vehicle to infrastructure technology, right? The Internet of Things and how our vehicles interact with it. Those interactions through the technology may very well create huge risks. We don't know enough about them from the automotive side right now to fully understand them. But based on what we know today and based on where auto manufacturers are, those risks are likely to be significant and they're likely to persist for some time. Because again, based on that Ponemon Institute study, most of the automotive manufacturers that do have cybersecurity programs, right? So 70% of the survey respondents said, oh yeah, we've got a cybersecurity program. But when you start digging down into that program, their testing processes are typically completed post delivery of the vehicle, right? Post manufacturing, post delivery. So that's why certain manufacturers, and just as an example, Tesla, right, is known for the updates that they provide to their vehicles, right? It's because a lot of the testing that they're doing, these cybersecurity tests that they're running, and obviously the threat's also evolving, are happening post-production and even post-delivery. So that's why we believe these risks will be significant as we go forward, just as they are today. They'll also be persistent. And then we have to consider the fact that those updates create risks of their own. And oftentimes we lose sight of that. The fact that there's an open communication channel. In fact, when we talked about the targeting of Bluetooth low energy key fobs, right? Leonard Wooters and his work at the University of Leuven. When we talked about that, what he was exploiting in his most recent exploitation of those key fobs was a manufacturer's vector, if you will, for updating those fobs with security updates. And that's how he ended up in 90 seconds from 5 meters away, taking full control of a key fob on a commercially produced vehicle. This was not an experiment done in a lab. It was an experiment done out in the operating environment, if you will, that the EP practitioner and security driver functions in. And so we have those risks. And the risks, by the way, when we talk about how frequently systems are updated, and again, there's manufacturers that are starting to experience this on some of their older models, older being 2 years old, is how often this technology updates creates a risk of actually burning out, if you will, is the description that engineers use, the flash memory on these vehicles, rendering them completely inoperable as this chip gets overwritten and overwritten and overwritten over time, and as the vehicle itself, as it's being operated, is overwriting them. It may potentially create a opportunity, that dynamic may create an opportunity for basically a distributed denial of service attack. If through those different vectors, an adversary is able to just bombard that flash memory with updates and continually do it, over a very short period of time, they could burn out, as those engineers will say, that flash memory, and now the vehicle won't operate. And again, they would use the same vectors that the manufacturer potentially is using, or the vectors that the internal systems that are integrated use to just keep providing that information. It doesn't have to necessarily be information that would impact the vehicle's functionality right until the moment that that chip reaches its capacity for overwriting and can no longer accept information. And then the entire system is rendered inoperable, forcing the vehicle to a stop. So these are some concerns we have. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot that can be done absent automotive manufacturers increasing their focus on pre-production cybersecurity programs, building in concert with cybersecurity firmware and software providers, building firewalls, EPP antivirus programs, EDR, endpoint detection and response programs. All of that has to become, a primary focus, if you will, in the automotive manufacturing industry for us as security practitioners to be comfortable with the risk mitigation and management strategies that they're providing. Right now, you can't be. I mean, that's the reality. And not to cast aspersions on any sector, but right now the automotive sector is behind. We as risk managers and risk management practitioners need to recognize that and understand that currently there's not a whole lot that we can do to impact that process other than to keep bringing it to the attention of the manufacturers. But I think one of the things we have to recognize is the executive protection / secure transportation profession or industry, if you will, is relatively small from the perspective of an automotive manufacturer. So there may be an opportunity, emphasis on may, in the aftermarket for an aftermarket cybersecurity company, or even an aftermarket company such as a vehicle armorer, to take a closer look and maybe create a separate focus on protecting vehicles from cyber attacks. Currently, we're not aware of anybody who is doing that, but if history holds true, I'm sure we're not the only ones who are thinking along those lines or looking at those potential opportunities. Then today, at the street level, as today's EP practitioner and security driver, what impact do these risks have? Well, I think there's some imminent risks that practitioners on both sides of the equation, your traditional protection and your secure transportation, need to understand. And first off, that's that these advanced driver assistance systems, ADAS as they're known, have an impact on our traditional tactics and techniques. They inevitably do. Whether it be something as simple as, I wouldn't expend a tremendous amount of training time, money, and effort on things like ramming and pit maneuvers at this point in time because they're not practical. The technology that is on most vehicles today, particularly the classes of vehicles that our principals prefer, negate those tactics and techniques. You're simply not going to ram a car with a vehicle equipped with emergency assist braking or with other types of collision avoidance technology. They simply will not allow it. Now, there are still vehicles out there where you can disengage those systems, but understand the risks, right? If you operate the vehicle with those systems disengaged and there is a collision, all of the risk points back to, right? All of the liability points back to the individual who disengaged that system. You have assumed all the risk for whatever happened, right? And in most vehicles today, even when you disengage those systems, they're not fully disengaged. At some point, that computer system will take over. Right? So that's an important distinction. And we're fast approaching the point where even that won't be possible, where those systems will be engaged and the operator of the vehicle will not have the capability or the mechanisms to disengage them. So there's that impact. Even the impact on the routes that we select. ADAS may have an impact on that because the way the technology works and the way the technology is intended to work, you're going to want to be more granular in your understanding of your routes. Those routes where there are more choke points and it is easier for somebody to be able to get close to the vehicle with another vehicle, perhaps through a hidden driveway or a blind alley or even around a blind curve. That becomes a higher risk area because now that vehicle just needs to be able to pull out and slow down potentially, or pull out and come to a stop, and our vehicle systems will bring it to a stop, hand us right over to the adversary. So we need to be more granular in our thinking about routes. What risks are on those routes, and are we able to manage them? Because again, we have these systems that take on a large part of that risk management paradigm. We also have to, as professionals, overcome the tendency of ADAS-equipped vehicles for the driver to become distracted. The Insurance Institute of Highway Safety released a report last year that demonstrated this tendency. And what it showed is over about a 30-day period, people operating vehicles equipped with collision avoidance and lane keeping assistance technology, over about a 30-day period operating that vehicle day over day, they became much more prone to be distracted, to reach for their phone, to be on the infotainment system, even to engage in conversations in the vehicle, all of which a number of studies have shown increase the risk to the drivers and passengers, right? Those distractions. Well, they tend to become complacent because they tend to become overconfident in those systems and what they can do as they become more familiar with them. There's also a tendency to be distracted by the systems themselves. The chimes, the voice notifications, the dash lights that come on. Those tend to be a distraction. Mercedes is working on an approach that's interesting, where they will be using multiple different tones, just like you can program your smartphone that when different things happen, a call comes in, the alert tone is different from when a text message comes in, which is different from when a message for a email comes in. All of those things they're looking at transferring all of those things or approaches over to vehicles. But now, as a driver, you're going to have to learn the purpose and functionality of those systems and all of those alerts, right? So there's that tendency to become distracted because we become over-reliant or overconfident in the technology, and then there's a tendency of the technology itself to distract us. It takes a really astute, really focused driver not to allow that to happen. And again, keeping in mind, there will be a point in time when none of this will be able to be disengaged, and you're just going to have to learn to live within the framework it provides. And there's also another overconfidence trap that was found in a AAA study for drivers, right? So when we're talking about today's impact of technology on drivers, we have to be aware of this other overconfidence trap, and that is attributing more capability to the vehicle's advanced driver assistance systems than they have. And interesting enough, the AAA study found that a lot of it comes down to literally semantics, what those systems are called. Something that's considered or called, labeled drive assist, most drivers will not be very confident in it. But you start applying some of these names, such as quote unquote autopilot, drivers tend to attribute to them a greater capability to that technology than those systems actually have. They become over-reliant on. And that is something that the security driver or the protection practitioner who finds themselves or herself behind the wheel needs to be attuned to and attentive to. We need to know before we go, what is the purpose and functionality of the technology on our car? Not just the marketing hype. I don't care what the manufacturer calls it. What does it actually do? And more importantly, what are the limitations of that technology? And to do that, you need to train and test, two different functions, right? You need to train and test in realistic conditions and situation. You know, it's challenging to keep up with the technology in terms of operating a training fleet. Yes, you want to train in vehicles that at least have core technology, such as ESC and traction control and anti-lock brakes as a package. But then from there, from platform to platform, there hasn't been a whole lot of standardization to date, although that is coming. There hasn't been a whole lot of standardization on these ADAS systems. It's incumbent upon the driver then to learn the purpose and functionality of the systems, understand what limits that technology has, and also the limits that that technology will present to the driver. Which brings us right back to that first point, right? How much time and energy should we spend on practicing J-turns and ramming when the reality is that most of the vehicles we're operating the technology is not going to allow that to happen. Or if we can overcome that technology, there's some unintended consequences that are going to increase the risk. Sure, I can take a vehicle equipped with electronic stability control and perform a J-turn. I increase the speed, maybe I run a little bit lower tire pressure, maybe it's on a wet surface. There's all sorts of things you can do to spoof the technology. But you run the very real risk of performing that maneuver perfectly and triggering the vehicle into safe mode, rendering it inoperable, or at a minimum, what they call limp mode, which takes out throttle response, right? Keeps your speed to a minimum, 15 to 20 miles an hour. So now you've done this really fancy, sexy maneuver to avoid whatever perceived threat there is. And if it's a bona fide threat, now you're going to drive away at 20 miles an hour. Not very successful. So it's incumbent to understand the limitations of the technology and the limitations it creates, and then train, but also test the vehicle that you will be operating in realistic conditions or situations safely. We don't want you driving beyond your limits or the car's limits. What we want you to do is understand, hey, when that system activates, what is the feedback I'm going to get? So that I understand where that limit is. All that system is telling you is you've reached the limit that the system created. And then understanding those conditions that create that will help you potentially to avoid them, or if they're unavoidable in an evasive driving situation, be it a potential accident or a security incident, if they are unavoidable, what can I expect as a driver so that I'm not taken by surprise by the system or that limit that it creates? If the vehicle gets tripped into limp mode, so be it. Then we're going to drive for 15 or 20 miles an hour. I'm not going to stop the vehicle and say, that's it, you win. But you need to know that ahead of time. And then, of course, we do as security professionals, security practitioners, we need to look down the road. What autonomous vehicle technology is on the horizon? What are those risks going to be? Vehicle to vehicle technology, what are the risks that it's going to impose? Can we set some limits? Are there programmable features that we can activate or deactivate? And of course, vehicle to infrastructure as well, because all of those are equally exploitable. And unfortunately, though, today we don't know the level of capability it's going to take to exploit those vulnerabilities. So what questions do you have?
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. We got lots of comments, and I think some questions. Spiridon says, in real situations, is someone going to have the space to do all those maneuvers? I think that's a good question in relation to the automated car as well.
Well, yeah, that's been our perspective at VDI has always been on the J-turn, which we haven't taught in well over a decade, is when you look at the situations and environments that you operate in, it's not very practical, right? Then when you look at the tendency in certain regions to use high center of gravity SUVs or even higher center of gravity armored SUVs, the J-turn is not a very practical maneuver. Let's face it, if you have the time and distance necessary to do a J-turn, you have the time and distance to back up and just simply reverse out of the problem, find a place to do a rapid but more controlled 2-point turn and drive away without the principal being tossed around in the vehicle, without his laptop or tablet crashing around. And inevitably, by the way, those things will impact or affect the driver. Literally, we've done some testing with it, right? The principal who's not seatbelted in when you're trying to do these rapid maneuvers, forward or reverse, is going to end up somewhere on the console or face down in the passenger seat. The laptop, the coffee cup, anything unsecured in the vehicle, it's likely to be all coming forward right at the driver. So yeah, a lot of those things that look good, certainly look sexy, certainly are character builders for drivers, aren't very practical. So that's an excellent point.
Mirza mentions about jammers or hedgehogs, I think we call them in the UK, and which are not really allowed in many countries. But anyway, surely that can help their security. What do you think, Joe?
there is a plus and minus to all sorts of technology, and those jammers or hedgehogs. One is availability and cost, and then of course legality. There's a lot of countries that they are not legal in. There's a lot of countries that it cannot be imported or exported to or from because of those legalities. Then there's the question of what else is it interfering with, right? Are we jamming our own communication capabilities? Are we jamming the capabilities of those telematics, if we're using telematic systems? Are we jamming those capabilities, right? Those are the questions, right? And then, of course, you have the potential that an adversary could also use that same jammer against your vehicle and your technology package, whether it be your point-to-point comms, your vehicle-to-vehicle, or vehicle-to-infrastructure, advanced driver assistance systems, to exploit or create a vulnerability in your transportation security plan.
No, I like it. Darren, hi, Darren. He asks, well, surely ultra high net worth EP transportation vehicles should not involve smart vehicles. Surely not. I guess in a world where maybe it could become illegal to drive, who knows? Everything is smart, like in the movies. What do you think, Joe?
Well, I find, and Phelim, you and I have touched upon this on a couple of occasions, both online and offline. I find the technology behind smart vehicles, and let's define smart as being an autonomous vehicle at this point, right? Because let's face it, right now we do have smart vehicles. You are not going to buy a Mercedes, a BMW, an Audi, an Infiniti, a Lexus, a Chevy Suburban that does not have some smart technology integrated into the operating system. That's just the reality. But as we go forward and we look at things like autonomous vehicles, even level 3, which isn't fully autonomous, it's not a self-driving vehicle. I love the technology. I think the technology is fascinating, but there's some downsides to it. And the greatest downsides are the security gains we make may very well be creating security risks, as we see from some of the experimentation we've talked about. The using a laser pen, using a high intensity LED light to spoof a system, even forcing a vehicle into a parking lot that has a circle drawn in it, 2 circles, right? 2 concentric circles, one that has a dashed line on it's a dashed circle on the outside and a solid line on the inside. An autonomous vehicle will cross the dashed line, which is legally permissible, but once it gets inside the solid line, it won't find its way out. So, you hate to be that security driver who has to go back to the detail leader and say, sorry, boss, I lost the principal. Well, how'd they do it? They forced us into a parking lot where there was a circle painted on the ground. But it's possible, right? But you can't avoid the presence of this technology in vehicles. We do have one client, ultra high net worth client, that was able to convince a very prominent automobile manufacturer to build a vehicle without collision avoidance technology. The release that they had to sign, I saw the release. The release the manufacturer had them sign was 15 pages. Right? Because you're assuming the risk now. We'll build you a car without that technology. And I don't even want to venture a guess at the cost. I am of the opinion it was at least twice as much as it would have cost you to buy that vehicle off a dealership floor. And I may be wrong, but knowing how auto manufacturing processes work and what it takes to build a one-off from a technology standpoint, hugely expensive. So yeah, surely, to the conventional wisdom and the protector's perspective may be, surely we're not going to have, these smart cars for our secure transportation operation. The reality is you are going to have that. And we're going to have to learn to live within the parameters they provide.
Well, we got some more nice comments. Sarah says cars are becoming hackable. They are designed to be more connected, as Joe mentioned. Todd says usually the highest risk is a principal faces around a vehicle transportation during movements, crash transportation infrastructure. Now add the continued development of technology only increases the risk. Owen says vehicles should come with the option of a dumb switch to disable it.
Well, we don't like that, right?
Yeah, but the problem is, with all of these things, if it comes with a dumb switch or a kill switch, in any case, if it's hacked, then someone can hack your vehicle and it will just,
right,
which is already an issue. And I think we've got some more comments too.
Also, those switches too become a matter of, again, that risk, right? Who assumes the risk? And if you don't have the system disengaged, to be honest, unless you've done a tremendous amount of training under stress in that specific vehicle, you're not likely to have the manual dexterity or the presence of mind to actually reach for that button and be able to engage or disengage it without a tremendous amount of practice. And I'm not saying it could or shouldn't be done. I'm just saying that is the reality of those dumb buttons.
Absolutely. Charles Miller makes a point. He says, ISTA previously indicated that the trend in executive transportation was away from sedans and towards SUVs. I guess that's depending how visible you want to be. Does that align with what you're seeing, and what are your thoughts on overall vehicle selection?
Yes, we have a very close relationship with ISDA. Our benefactor at VDI, Tony Scotti, is the founder of ISDA. So a lot of our clients are ISDA members, so they participate in the studies and surveys that bring forth that data. So yeah, we're absolutely seeing a trend towards SUVs, which is not necessarily a bad thing when you talk about it from a security perspective and a safety perspective, right? Because keep in mind, when we're in the vehicle, security drivers are still responsible for the safety and security of the principal, right? So one is they provide the driver a better field of vision, unless you're in a sea of SUVs. And two is they have the full-size SUVs with full chassis, have a much higher safety rating in the most common types of accidents, which are side impact crashes. They do have a higher propensity or potential for rollovers, but it's actually much more limited than we tend to think it is, based on when the circumstances or conditions within which those rollovers happen relative to the secure transportation function. So yeah, to Charles' question, yeah, we are seeing that. We are seeing that migration to SUVs, right? And it's there are times though when there are principals. We know we've got clients whose principals, either because of age limitations or physical limitations, or even we've had some who the principal is a female, and because of the attire she has to wear, isn't comfortable with quote unquote climbing up into a truck, where the sedan may still be used. But yeah, there is a noticeable migration towards those SUV platforms.
I guess there's also an IED benefit with big enough to put the footrest, so that if you do get a something underneath, you'll be protected from the vibration. So why not? I suppose that could.
Right. And yes, in higher risk environments, the full-size SUV has been the mainstay of secure transportation operations for decades. I mean, my first experience in an armored SUV was in the early 90s in Bogota, Colombia. And no one was more surprised than I when an AK round penetrated the rear glass and embedded itself in the windshield of our armored vehicle.
Indeed. So more comments we had. Glenn Edmonds says security drivers will need to drive within the vehicle electronics parameters. Will that kill the training out of the box methods? Yeah,
Glenn Edmonds, who's our managing director of VDI Africa, as it runs his Glenn Edmonds Advanced Driving. He and I have talked about this extensively. It's going to change the nature of how we train drivers. I don't think it's going to kill the driver training needs, but it is going to change it. Things like J-turns and ramming, very little need to train on that when they're not likely to be valuable tactics or techniques, particularly when you consider damaging vehicles today, right? Yeah, you could knock a mirror off a vehicle in days gone by and say, okay, well, we can drive without the mirror. That may not be the case today. That mirror, right? First off, replacing it is no longer, $50. It's $1,500 to $1,700 because some of the sensors for the different ADAS systems are in that mirror. So you may impact the drivability of the vehicle in doing some of these more aggressive maneuvers or tactics. And anytime you get the vehicle's tires spinning, you have the potential to engage those systems and create these interventions that reduce your performance or trip things like limp mode or safe mode. So yes, it will change the nature of driver training. And again, I may be biased as a training provider. I don't see it changes the need. In fact, it may make it a more stringent requirement because drivers are going to have to learn how to operate within those electronic limitations.
And of course, if your principal has got high tastes, I was in a Mulsanne Mulliner edition, $1,000 for the ashtray, replacement.
Right.
So no, good fun. I love this interactivity, and we do have that little window to keep this going. So Dan Carter says, "Great, Joe. I guess we're set more for more tech and probably likely to save Principal's life, through it." Farouk says, "Not against any company. This is just an opinion," and I think that was in relation to he's against smart vehicles. That's Farouk's. Gary Fraser says, "Vehicle choices depends on location." Kevin, who spoke earlier, Kev Weeks said, "What measures do teams take to data cleanse vehicles when hiring out of home region? Think of digital footprint left on smart vehicles."
Well, that's a key point, and a lot of the teams we're working with, they'll do a number of things. One is they're using 12-volt power port to USB adapters that will not let the vehicle's information systems connect to the phone. That's step number one, right? I don't know how many of you have had a rental vehicle or used, a third-party vehicle for your protection, but when you plug in your phone in a standard 12-volt plug, there will be the potential that vehicle will connect to your phone and download your contacts right into the vehicle system, right? Into the infotainment system. So Kevin makes a great point. That should be part of your risk management process today, not in the future, not depending on what the technology is. Make sure you've got your 12-volt power adapter that will block the vehicle connecting to your phone. And then double check. Make sure you're going into that infotainment system and deleting any information, including in the mapping system, any locations you might have programmed in there. Myself, my preference, and a good deal of our clients, their folks are not putting any locations into the onboard mapping system, right? They're just not doing it. And that's a great precaution, but you still want to make sure, to the extent possible, you're deleting all that information. But you also have to be aware that it is possible, even once you've deleted that information, to recover certain information from the vehicle's control system. Now, currently today, that would require on most vehicles a significant amount of time and energy to disassemble the dash of the car to get to the controller, the microprocessor that has that information, and then some pretty significant software to be able to exploit it. But in the future, that may not be the case. But at the surface, right, in those infotainment systems, if you're going to connect to them, first off, you should prevent your phone from connecting to it. And second off, if you're putting data in those mapping systems, you should clear it. And I saw something flash. Kevin made a great point. Any contract service providers you're using, you should require that contractually, and you should be verifying that they're doing it. Don't just take their word for it. Get that information out of the cars. And even if it's the vehicle that you're using for transportation on a daily basis, we have to be concerned about that. the surety of any information that may be on those systems. Do we have commonly visited locations in the mapping system? In which case, what happens when that vehicle goes in for service, right? When these systems first started getting prevalent, we were doing a vulnerability assessment on a corporate executive, and we were able to, through social engineering, get a technician at a dealership to just write down all of the locations that were stored in the mapping system of the vehicle. It was a vulnerability assessment. So the positive is, hey, we've identified this gap. But the negative is it didn't take a whole lot of effort to get somebody to give us not only house location, two secondary and tertiary resident locations, the daughter's horse riding academy, the son's soccer academy, the wife's spa, all that data we had. Right? So it's not just, to Kevin's point, it's not just when you're operating outside your normal environment.
Well, I'm conscious of time. So many nice points coming through. Todd had a quick question. Can you recommend products to mitigate that risk? I thought that might be a nice thing to finish on.
To mitigate the
risk of your car driving away, or I suppose the smart thing.
Currently now, there is no standard. I think Kevin mentioned this in one of his comments. There is no standard for automotive technology. Oh, he's looking for 12-volt blocking Bluetooth technology. I see a note from Todd. Hate to say it, but the easiest thing to do is an internet search or search Amazon. There's any number of them out there. So look there. I know Joe LaSorsa at LaSorsa and Associates. He just did a technology webcast. I don't know if it's been saved on his website, but he's certainly another resource when it comes to this type of technological tools to reach out for. He may have one that he prefers to use. Or some folks in the audience, I'm sure, are using them. Share with Todd what your preferences are.
Now, I think Joe was here just a moment ago. He's going to come back a bit later, so
okay, good.
That'd be good. Wow, so many topics. We need to do an entire event on protected mobility. I think that's the next thing, isn't it? Thank you ever so much. This is great deep dive. So much engagement from the audience too. It's a really popular topic, and you're very popular, Joe. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Phelim. And listen, when you want to talk about protective mobility, putting something together, we'd love to help you with that.
Awesome. Well, thanks ever so much. Please give Joe a wonderful round of applause. Lots of love coming in. Kusai says thanks. Martin, Ali, Owen, Glenn, Chris, Gary. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. I will